You think you know ancient Greece. Philosophers in white robes, marble temples shining in the sun, heroic statues frozen in time. But behind those legends was another world. A world of women whose lives shaped the city, yet were erased from its story. Some lived in state-run brothels for a single coin. Others reclined at symposia, whispering into the ears of generals, philosophers, and kings. Their names were carved into court records, whispered in scandal, and sung in poems. Because in Athens, sex wasn't just pleasure, it was politics, philosophy, and survival. If this forgotten side of history fascinates you, subscribe to Stone Sleepers and drift with us through the shadows of the past. And in the comments, tell us, where in the world are you listening tonight? We love knowing how far these ancient stories travel. Now, close your eyes, slow your breathing, and step with me into the streets of Athens as the first light of dawn glimmers on the marble steps of the Acropolis. You wake to the sound of sandals on stone streets. At first, it is faint, the shuffle of a few early risers, but soon the city is stirring, the noise swelling into a chorus. Somewhere nearby, a merchant rolls open the wooden shutters of his stall with a heavy thud. The smell of freshly baked bread, still warm from clay ovens, mingles with the sharper tang of olives and fish being carried from the harbor. Above all this, incense drifts lazily from shrines dedicated to Athena, the city's guardian. Smoke curls skyward, pale threads of devotion rising into the golden morning. The Acropolis glows as the first light of Helios strikes marble temples, the columns catching fire in the sun. This is Athens at daybreak, a city alive, sacred and profane at once. And you are not waking in a villa of polished marble or among citizens preparing for debate. You are in a narrow street, tucked away in the heart of the city, where women like you sleep on reed mats, side by side. The stone walls are cool against your back, the air still heavy, with the scent of last night's perfumes and sweat. You are not a wife, the kind who hides behind courtyard gates, barely glimpsing the street. You are a prostitute, one of the many who give this city its other heartbeat. As you rise, you hear a priestess chanting hymns at a nearby altar. The words are carried by the breeze, mingling with the louder calls of farmers selling figs and honey in the agora. These contrasts, sacred and everyday, divine and raw, are what define Athens. The philosophers may dream of ideals, but you live in the dust and noise of the streets, where ideals rarely feed the stomach. You step into the alley, and the stones are cool beneath your feet. A slave passes by carrying amphorae of wine, straining under their weight. He glances at you but does not meet your eyes. Respectable women are meant to stay invisible, veiled, moving in shadows. Yet you are seen, always seen. For better or worse, the city does not let women like you vanish. From your doorway, you glimpse the agora filling with men in white chaitons, some haggling, others simply loitering, waiting for gossip to reach their ears. A group of young men, still smelling of last night's wine, stumble past, laughing too loudly. They point toward your street, where they know they can find not just food or wine, but companionship. Their laughter fades as they turn toward the stalls, leaving you in the quiet aftershock of their voices. There is a rhythm to mornings here. The temples gleam, the markets fill, and women like you prepare for another day of survival. Some of your companions will braid their hair, apply kohl to their eyes, dab scented oil at their necks. Others will simply wait, weary from too many nights, hoping for a client who pays fairly rather than cruelly. And yet there is more to this dawn than survival. The city itself seems to hum with possibility. Statues of gods stand tall over the agora, their carved eyes unblinking, watching. Pigeons scatter as children run, their sandals slapping stone, their laughter sharp against the murmur of trade. You feel the weight of the city, its glory and its indifference. This is not the Athens of marble textbooks. This is the Athens that breathes and bleeds, where every dawn is a reminder. Life is precarious, fragile, fleeting. And as the sun climbs higher, the day begins, not just for the philosophers who dream of truth, or the generals who plot wars, but for you and the countless women who walk this narrow path between necessity and survival. You step out from the shaded alley and follow the winding stone road deeper into the waking city. The sun has risen higher now, spilling gold over tiled rooftops and catching on bronze shop signs that creak in the breeze. The main streets are loud with traders calling out their wares, but as you turn toward your quarter, the noise softens. Here, in the quarter known for its brothels, the air carries a different scent: cheap perfume, sour wine, and last night's smoke lingering in the walls. The houses here are not the elegant villas of citizens, but narrow, plain structures. Some are barely more than rooms with reed mats. Others, run by wealthier madams, are painted with crude frescoes of lovers entangled, images meant to advertise to passers-by what pleasures lie within. Doors are left half open, the flicker of lamps still visible inside. A few women lean in the doorways already, their hair freshly braided, their tunics arranged to show just enough shoulder or thigh. They murmur greetings to men who wander by, fishing for the day's first client. The word for this place is pornion, a brothel, a house of bought affection, and the women who work here, pornai. That word will echo across centuries, transformed, twisted, until it finds its way into languages far removed from these streets. But here and now, it is simply survival. You pass one of the wealthier houses, its walls brighter than the rest. A painted sign above the door shows a pair of clasped hands. No subtlety here. Inside, the women are property, bought and sold like amphorae of oil. Many are slaves from Thrace, Lydia, or the Black Sea, brought to Athens not by choice but by chains. Some were once daughters of farmers, others captured in war. Their voices carry faint accents, their laughter forced. The coins they earn do not line their own purses, but the purses of the men who own them. Farther down, the brothels grow rougher. Wooden beams sag, plaster crumbles, doors hang crooked. Here the price of entry is small, a single coin, perhaps two. Men wander in and out without shame. There is no secrecy in this quarter. Unlike later centuries, the Athenians do not hide what is public. The philosopher may condemn, the priest may preach, but the pornion survives, always filled, always busy. As you walk, you hear fragments of stories. A woman complains of a client who refused to pay. Another laughs as she counts her earnings from a merchant who drank too much and forgot his purse on the floor. One whispers about a girl taken by a wealthy citizen into his household, no longer a pawn but now something else. A mistress, a hetairai, a courtesan who walks a different path. Their voices rise and fall like a chorus, weaving gossip with grief, bitterness with defiance. The streets themselves tell the story. Graffiti scratched into plaster shows names, crude drawings, boasts of visits. Someone has carved a figure of a woman beside a coin, a reminder that every encounter here is measured in drachmas and obols. This is commerce as much as intimacy, a marketplace of flesh that feeds on both desire and desperation. And yet there is life here beyond transaction. Children dart between doorways, chasing one another with squeals of laughter, their mothers watching from thresholds. A woman hums a lullaby as she sweeps the street before her door. Another sprinkles water on the stones to keep the dust down. Even in the brothel quarter, daily life continues. People eat, wash, braid their hair, tell stories and hope. Hope for more coins, kinder men, or perhaps a chance to leave this place behind. By mid-morning, the brothel streets are alive. Men stroll by in groups, some curious, some familiar, some hesitant. The women are ready, some painted and perfumed, others plain, each with her own way of drawing attention. Deals are struck in glances, in words, in silence. And you, standing in the doorway of your small room, feel the pull of another day beginning. This is Athens too, not the gleaming temples, not the speeches of statesmen, but the hidden streets where bodies are sold and futures are traded away. Here, beneath the marble glory, the city reveals its other face. By late morning, when the streets of Athens shimmer under the rising heat, the world of the Hetairai awakens. Their houses are not in the narrow alleys of the Pornion, but in quieter quarters, tucked behind courtyards shaded by olive trees. The first thing you notice is the silence. No loud calls from doorways, no crude signs painted on walls. Instead, the homes of these women whisper of refinement. A carved wooden door, a mosaic floor patterned with dolphins or ivy, a single bronze lamp lit even in daylight, its scent of imported oil filling the air. Unlike the Porni, many of the Hetairai are free women or freed slaves who have carved out lives of independence. They are educated, or at least clever enough to move with men who hold power. Some know music, others dance. Some recite lines of Homer, or debate politics, or write poetry of their own. Their clients are not laborers or soldiers with a single coin, but men of rank, philosophers, generals, wealthy merchants, even politicians who shape the destiny of the city. Here, intimacy is not rushed, it is cultivated. A hetera offers not only her body but her company, her wit, her charm. She is not simply for sale, she is chosen, and she chooses in return. And in that delicate balance lies her influence. You picture one of these women, reclining on a couch during a symposium, the smoky air thick with wine and laughter. Around her, men speak of wars and treaties, of trade routes and philosophy. She listens, her eyes alert, her smile measured. When she speaks, they lean closer. Some historians later whisper that such women shaped ideas, that in the midst of cups of diluted wine and the music of lyres, they steered the minds of men who steered Athens itself. One name drifts through memory, Aspasia of Miletus. Though more than a Hetairai, she walked this blurred line between courtesan and companion, and her relationship with Pericles scandalized and fascinated the city. They say she hosted salons, where thinkers gathered, where Socrates himself may have sat. They say she advised on rhetoric, influencing speeches that resounded in the assembly. And yet, for many Athenians, she remained a foreign woman, an outsider, forever tied to the shadow of scandal. The Hetairai lived with contradiction, admired for their beauty, envied for their freedom, desired for their talents, yet also vulnerable, precarious, forever one step away from disgrace. Their homes might be painted and perfumed, but they carried no guarantee of safety. A patron might elevate them with gifts, even grant them protection, but fortunes in Athens shifted as quickly as the tides. A woman who sat at the side of a general could find herself discarded, or worse, accused of corruption. And yet, in the memory of Athens, the Hetairai shine brighter than the women of marble statues or the nameless wives kept behind doors. While respectable women were confined to weaving rooms and courtyards, these courtesans moved through symposia, banquets, even political circles. They saw the city's heart from angles denied to others. Outside, the day grows hotter. In the brothel quarter, the pornai call for coins. But in shaded rooms across the city, the Hetairai prepare for evenings of wine, music, and conversation that may ripple far beyond the walls where they are spoken. Athens is not one city, but two, the one carved in stone and the one whispered in shadows. The Hetairai walk between them, shaping both, though history will never quite decide whether to honor them or condemn them. The sun has dipped low, and Athens glows in amber. The clamor of the agora fades, replaced by the steady rhythm of sandals against stone as men make their way to the symposium, the heart of Athenian leisure and influence. You follow the path through narrow streets past flickering oil lamps until you reach a courtyard where laughter already rises into the dusk. Inside, couches are spread in a circle, low tables laid with figs, olives, honey cakes, and amphorae of wine. The air is heavy with incense and the faint pluck of a lyre. This is not merely a drinking party. It is the theater where reputations are made, where philosophy is born, and where the lives of courtesans intertwine with the city's most powerful men. The door opens, and the Hetairai enter. Their presence changes the atmosphere instantly. The chatter softens, the men lean forward, the room brightens with expectation. Unlike the wives of these men, kept behind closed doors, excluded from such gatherings, the Hetairai belong here. They are not background figures but central players, the ones who carry the evening's rhythm. A man raises his cup and begins a toast, quoting a line of Homer. A courtesan counters with another, her voice lilting and confident. Laughter ripples through the group. Another woman dances, her bracelets jingling in the lamplight, shadows bending across the painted walls. In these moments, the symposium becomes a place where boundaries blur. Politics mixes with poetry, eros with rhetoric, drunkenness with revelation. For the men, the symposium is a place to unwind, but also to plot, to persuade, to test ideas in the safety of wine-hazed camaraderie. And for the courtesans, it is both opportunity and risk. Every gesture, every word is calculated. A careless joke could offend. A clever phrase could win favor that lasts a lifetime. You imagine the stories whispered long after such nights, how Aspasia's words once silenced a room, how a Hetaira's clever counsel swayed a debate, how jealous rivals muttered against their influence. The symposium is remembered for its philosophy, for Plato's dialogues, for the music of the lyre, but beneath it all is this truth. These evenings could not exist without the courtesans who animated them. The wine flows stronger as the night deepens. Cups are filled and emptied. Games of katabos send drops of wine arcing across the room. Songs rise louder, and the air thickens with heat and smoke. A courtesan reclines beside a patron, her voice low in his ear. She may not carry a vote in the assembly, but here, in the intoxicated heart of Athens, her influence takes root. By the time the oil lamps burn low, secrets have been shared, promises exchanged, and the line between affection and strategy blurred beyond recognition. Some courtesans will leave with heavy purses, others with promises of protection, and some with nothing but exhaustion. The symposium, like Athens itself, is both intoxicating and cruel. Outside, the night air is cooler. The stars over Attica shimmer, indifferent to the alliances and betrayals, just sealed in lamplight. And, in the shadows, You sense the quiet resilience of the women who carried the symposium's soul, neither fully accepted nor entirely erased, their voices woven into the very rhythm of the city. The streets are darker here, the air heavier. You leave behind the marbled courtyards of the symposium and step into the cramped alleys near the Piraeus Gate, where Athens shows its rougher edge. The scent of wine and sweat hangs thick, mixed with the smoke of cheap lamps burning low. This is the brothel quarter, the world of the pornai, women whose lives could not be more different from the celebrated Hetairai. The name itself comes from pernemi, to sell, and that is what these women did. Sell their bodies, their nights, and often their futures, under the tight grip of the brothel keepers. You pass a low stone building with a wooden door, its threshold worn from countless footsteps. Inside there are no liars, no philosophical debates, no polished rhetoric. Only narrow rooms, straw mats, and a line of men waiting with coins in hand. The brothel is efficient, transactional, and stripped of the illusions of intimacy. A torch flickers across the walls, revealing rough graffiti scratched into plaster, crude jokes, carved names, the fleeting traces of those who came before. Scholars debate how many such brothels existed, but some claim Solon, the great lawgiver, legalized and even organized them, building state-run houses to keep male desire in check and to protect respectable women. Whether that's myth or truth, the brothels remained, embedded in Athens like scars in stone. The women here are often slaves, bought young and trained for this life. Some are foreigners, captured in war, their tongues stumbling over Greek phrases as they serve men who barely look them in the eye. Their price is low, sometimes just a single obol, the wage of a laborer's half-day. It is survival reduced to coin, dignity reduced to shadows. Yet even here, resilience glimmers. A woman whispers jokes to another between clients, clinging to slivers of humor. Another hums a melody she remembers from home, soft and broken, filling the narrow space with fragile beauty. In fragments like these, humanity resists being crushed. You wonder about the moments when men stumble out into the street, leaving the women behind in darkness. What thoughts do they carry? Some may dream of freedom, some may resign themselves to endless nights, and some may, quietly, scheme for escape. The historian Lysias once wrote of women who rose from this world to buy their freedom, though such stories were rare and hard-won. Archaeologists uncover fragments of this life: ceramic oil lamps, broken amphorae, a few small coins left behind in dusty corners. These relics whisper of a reality that official histories preferred to ignore, a reality lived by thousands. The brothel quarter does not have the glamour of the symposium. It does not echo in Plato's dialogues or glitter in painted frescoes. But it existed, stubbornly, as the other side of Athens, the place where survival stripped away pretense, where women lived lives that the city preferred not to see. And as you step back into the night, the contrast lingers. The city of democracy and marble also held this world of shadows and whispers. Both sides, inseparable, shaped what it meant to be alive in Athens. Coins clink in the shadows. In Athens, desire always had a price, and it was counted not in passion, but in obols and drachmas. You walk along the agora, where men haggle over olives and amphorae of wine, and hear whispers of another kind of bargain being struck, one between men and the women who lived at the edge of society. The Hetairai, with their wit and refinement, might charge as much as a skilled artisan earned in weeks. These were not simply exchanges of flesh, but arrangements of companionship, conversation, and a seat at the table of men who believed themselves rulers of reason. To lie with a Hetairai was not only to seek pleasure but also to buy into a certain status, to walk away having tasted a world of sophistication. But the pornai lived in another economy entirely. In the brothels, the price of a woman's body could be as little as 1 obol, a coin small enough that even a poor laborer could afford it after a day's toil. The transaction was swift, stripped of luxury, and left no trace but the jingle of bronze in the keeper's pouch. The house itself took the greater share, leaving the women with little more than survival. Historians still argue over Solon's role in this system. Some say the lawgiver himself founded state-run brothels, making desire a public commodity as ordinary as bread or wine. Others doubt it, pointing to the lack of firm evidence and suggesting it was rumor, an ancient joke repeated until it hardened into memory. But whether or not Solon set the foundation, the economic reality remained. Prostitution was woven into the fabric of Athenian life, taxed and tolerated, invisible in law, yet everywhere in practice. Beyond the coin and the body was the economics of survival. Many women were slaves, owned by brothel keepers who treated them as investments. Others were freedwomen, who tried to make their own way, saving every coin in hopes of one day purchasing independence. The poet Philemon once sneered that these women sell what is not theirs, their bodies, owned by others. But even in such bitterness lies a truth of their condition. And yet, in this brutal economy, there were rare stories of escape. Inscriptions speak of women who managed to buy their freedom, even to dedicate offerings to Aphrodite in gratitude. A small terracotta figurine, unearthed near the port of Piraeus, bears a faint inscription, "To the goddess from Philea, freed at last." Such fragments remind us that behind each transaction there was a human being, a voice, a prayer, a fragile hope. The city depended on this hidden trade more than it cared to admit. Respectable women were confined to the household, their honor guarded like fragile pottery. Men turned instead to the pornai and Hetairai, sustaining an entire shadow economy. And though the philosophers might rail against indulgence, even they were not immune. For in the quiet confessions of letters and plays, you can still hear their footsteps echoing down the same alleys you walk tonight. The clink of coins fades as you step away from the brothel quarter. In your mind, the sound lingers, not just as currency, but as the rhythm of lives measured, bought, and sold. Desire, in Athens, was never free. You wandered deeper into Athens, where marble columns rise like guardians of order. The city prided itself on law, debate, and reason. But when it came to the lives of prostitutes, the laws were less clear, shifting like shadows cast at dusk. The orators of Athens tell us much. Demosthenes, sharp-tongued and unyielding, once declared, "We have hetairas for pleasure, concubines for daily care, and wives to bear us legitimate children." His words were not simply a cynical remark. They were the codification of a hierarchy. Law and custom placed each woman in her box: wife, concubine, prostitute. To step outside of those roles was to risk dishonor. Yet despite the stigma, prostitution itself was not outlawed. Instead, it was tolerated, sometimes even taxed. In the agora, prostitutes might be listed alongside tradesmen and wine sellers when officials counted revenue. Some scholars argue that taxes on brothels helped fill Athens' coffers, proof that the city profited from what it publicly scorned. There were, however, limits. A prostitute could never marry into respectability. The law forbade it. Even if a freed woman had bought back her liberty with years of labor, she was still barred from the citizen's marriage bed. And should such a union occur, the punishment was harsh: loss of citizenship for the man, disgrace for the woman. In some cases, brothel keepers had to register their slaves with magistrates, recording the women as if they were livestock in the city's ledgers. It is a cold reminder of how the state viewed them, not as persons, but as commodities to be tracked and controlled. Yet Athens was never without contradiction. Plays performed at festivals often mocked the hypocrisy of men who condemned prostitutes by day, but visited them by night. Comic poets filled the stage with sharp-tongued courtesans who exposed male foolishness. And in these performances, the law's rigidity seemed to melt into laughter, revealing what everyone already knew. The system of rules was written in ink, but the practice of desire was written in flesh. For some women, law offered a kind of fragile shield. Contracts could be drawn up between Hetairai and wealthy patrons, granting financial security or protection in exchange for exclusivity. Though not marriage, these agreements had a legal flavor, bargains inked on papyrus, witnessed by scribes, and honored in courts if disputes arose. And always, the goddess Aphrodite lingered in the background. Shrines to her rose near ports and marketplaces, a silent acknowledgement that love, lust, and commerce were inseparable. Some whispered that by offering tribute to her altar, men could cleanse themselves of the shame of desire. Others believed she herself sanctioned these unions, laws of men notwithstanding. So you walk through a city that proclaimed reason yet lived in contradiction, condemning yet profiting, restricting yet indulging, legislating yet laughing at its own hypocrisy. The laws of the city tried to contain desire, but they never could. As you leave the shadow of the magistrate's stoa, the voices of Athens grow softer. You feel the weight of rules written on stone, and the countless lives bent beneath them. Night has fallen over Athens, and with it comes a new world. The bustling agora is quiet now, shutters drawn, torches flickering in narrow streets. But behind the heavy wooden doors of private homes, another kind of gathering begins, the symposium. You hear the faint pluck of a lyre drifting through a courtyard wall, the rhythmic clapping of hands keeping time. Inside, men recline on couches in a circle, craters of wine diluted with water at their feet. Lamps glow with olive oil, casting golden halos on marble floors. The symposium was more than drinking. It was philosophy, poetry, and politics, all mixed with pleasure. And for that pleasure, the presence of hetairas was essential. These women were not invited simply as decoration. They played music, recited verses, and sparked debates with quick wit. Imagine the scene. Socrates, beard unkempt, challenging a courtesan with a riddle on love, or Alcibiades, drunk with arrogance, pressing a hetaira to whisper secrets of the city's rival factions. It was not unusual for prostitutes to know more of statecraft than respectable wives, who were locked away in the women's quarters. Yet pleasure was never far. Between cups of wine, laughter, and the perfume of roses, the hetairas shifted roles, from entertainer to lover, from muse to confidant. Some men sought them for a night, others for a lifetime of patronage. A hetaira could emerge from a symposium with more than coin. She might gain influence, leverage, or even the ear of a general. But the symposium was also dangerous. It was a stage where reputation was made and ruined. A careless word from a courtesan, repeated by the wrong tongue, could turn into scandal. Comic poets relished this, spinning tales of hetairas who mocked philosophers or manipulated politicians. Behind the laughter lurked unease. These women, legally powerless, held social power that could not be erased. Wine flowed freely, loosening restraint. The kylix, A wide, shallow cup passed from hand to hand. Each sip brought more games. Courtesans, where men flicked dregs of wine at a target, often dedicating the throw to the name of a courtesan they adored. Imagine hearing your own name spoken aloud in a room thick with smoke and song, tossed into the air like a prayer and a joke at once. Some hetairais came prepared, with perfume oils to dab on the wrists of patrons or garlands of flowers to crown their heads. They played roles with skill, weaving charm and intimacy into the ritual. Others brought their silence, listening as men unburdened themselves of fears and ambitions. Silence itself became a weapon, a mirror that made men feel wise. And when the lamps burned low, shadows deepened. Behind screens or in adjoining chambers, bodies entwined, bargains struck, futures shifted. A hetairai might emerge at dawn richer in coin, or bound to a patron's favor for better or worse. The symposium was the beating heart of Athenian masculinity, but women on its margins gave it shape, color, and heat. Without them, it was only wine and men. With them, it was life itself, messy, passionate, and unforgettable. You step back into the cool night, streets empty once again. The echoes of lyres and laughter follow you, fading into silence as the stars keep watch. When the last songs of the symposium fade, the hetairais return to their own world. It is not the dim barracks of common prostitutes near the Piraeus, nor the brothel houses owned by state entrepreneurs. No, the hetairais have homes, cultivated spaces that reflect their craft and ambition. Imagine stepping into such a house on the outskirts of Athens. Lamps burn in tall clay stands, their light catching bronze mirrors and polished vessels. The air smells of imported incense, frankincense from Arabia, myrrh from distant lands, gifts from patrons who wanted to please. The floors are strewn with woven rugs, dyed in colors too rich for an average artisan. A hetairais house was both a stage and a sanctuary, a place where she could host, retreat, and control the terms of her encounters. Here, younger courtesans learned their art. Some were foreign girls, sold or captured in wars, trained in music, dance, and the art of conversation. A seasoned hetairai might teach them how to read poetry aloud, how to respond with wit, how to make a man feel admired, yet never fully possessed. Knowledge was a weapon, honed carefully in these rooms. And this house was more than a business. It was a network. Patrons, philosophers, poets, and merchants came not only for intimacy but for access. Within these walls, deals were whispered, alliances formed. A hetairai might introduce one man to another, casually binding herself into their politics. To underestimate her was a mistake the powerful often made, until they realized their rivals had secured her loyalty first. Yet danger pressed close. Respectable women lived in near seclusion, their lives dictated by fathers or husbands. For a hetairai, freedom was intoxicating but precarious. Without protection, she could be slandered, fined, or even sold into slavery again. Behind every smile, every graceful movement was a calculation: what to reveal, what to withhold, whom to trust. The house also carried an aura of myth. Some said hetairais kept votive shrines to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and desire, offering prayers before receiving a guest. Others claimed they invoked Eros, the mischievous god of passion, to bless or curse their affairs. Whether or not such rituals happened, the rumors themselves magnified their mystique. Aspasia of Miletus, the most famous hetairai of them all, was said to have run such a household. Her gatherings were renowned. Philosophers and generals alike came to her door, not only for her beauty, but for her mind. Pericles, the leader of Athens, was captivated by her, so much so that comic playwrights mocked him mercilessly, claiming he was ruled by a courtesan. Yet in Aspasia's house, ideas were shaped that would ripple through the golden age of Athens itself. The house of Hetairai was, in truth, both haven and battlefield. It protected women from the rough dangers of the streets, yet exposed them to the subtler dangers of power. Within its walls, music, laughter, and perfume masked the constant tension of survival. To be a Hetairai was to live in this balance, celebrated and desired, but never entirely safe. You step outside again, the quiet street bathed in silver moonlight. Behind you, the house still glows faintly, a world within a world. Its secrets remain guarded, but its influence radiates through the city like incense carried on the night wind. The dawn returns, but this time you walk not through marble temples or grand symposium halls, but toward the crowded quarters of the city where the foreign women live. Athens was a proud democracy, yet its freedoms were not for everyone. For most women in the sex trade, citizenship was impossible, respect unreachable, and home always elsewhere. These women were called metics, foreigners who lived and worked in Athens, often taxed and restricted. Many were from Ionia, Thrace, or Asia Minor, their accents carrying the music of faraway coasts. Others were war captives, brought to Athens not by choice but by chains. They carried with them fragments of their culture, tattoos, songs, prayers whispered in strange tongues when the city was asleep. Picture them in the brothel district near the Piraeus harbor, waiting in shadowed doorways. The sailors knew them as exotic, different, desirable. Some men came precisely because they were foreign, craving what was other, as though passion itself could be bought more easily if it crossed a border. Yet the very foreignness that attracted also condemned them to exclusion. They could never marry an Athenian citizen. Their children could never inherit land. Their lives were tethered to service. Still, foreign women brought variety to Athens's sexual economy. Some introduced foreign beauty rituals, oils scented with saffron, kohl around the eyes, hair dyed with herbs unknown to the locals. These became fashionable, whispered about among men, imitated by hetairais, and sometimes mocked in the plays. Even as outsiders, they influenced the city's aesthetic, its sense of allure. Yet the weight of exploitation pressed hard. For every Aspasia who rose to power, there were hundreds who remained nameless, their lives erased from memory. They were taxed by the state like cattle, their earnings controlled by pimps, their bodies worn down in rooms barely lit, the plaster walls scribbled with crude graffiti. The state profited from them, but never acknowledged them as part of Athens's shining democracy. And still, there was resilience. Some women formed bonds with one another, a quiet sisterhood against the constant churn of clients. A Thracian girl might teach an Ionian how to play a foreign tune on the flute. An older woman might share tricks for easing pain, or prayers whispered to Artemis for protection. Within these exchanges, fragments of identity survived. They were not only objects, they were storytellers, healers, survivors. One scholar's fragment tells of a foreign courtesan who became famous for her wit. Men paid not just for her body, but for the way she made them laugh, the way she could turn insult into poetry. She never became a legend like Aspasia, yet for a brief time she made herself unforgettable. And so the paradox deepens. Athens, the city of freedom, democracy, philosophy, rested partly on the labor of women who had none of those things. The laughter of foreign prostitutes filled its taverns. Their sweat and tears flowed through its harbors. They were invisible in official history, but they were present in every corner of lived reality. As the sun climbs higher, you leave the harbor behind. The shouts of merchants and sailors fade, but the image of those women lingers, faces from across the seas, bound together in survival, etched into the hidden heart of Athens. The day fades, and with it, Athens prepares for its favorite pastime, the symposium. These were not simply drinking parties, but gatherings, where men stretched their minds, their appetites, and their wealth. Philosophy, politics, music, and desire all spilled into the same shallow bowls of wine. You walk along the marble streets as torches are lit, each flame a signal that the night has begun. Inside the andron, the men's hall, couches are arranged in a circle, low tables ready for food and goblets. The host reclines first, and others follow, leaning on cushions embroidered with lions and dolphins. The air is heavy with incense. The sweet scent masks the sweat of bodies that will linger here for hours. At the center stands a crater, a great mixing bowl where wine is cut with water, guarded by a slave who decides how strong the night will be. And then come the entertainers. Music begins with the aulos, a double pipe, its sound sharp and almost otherworldly. Hetairai enter gracefully, their hair adorned with ribbons, their ankles ringing with small bells. They carry not only lyres and flutes, but also conversation, laughter, and wit. These women were more than company. They were central to the rhythm of the symposium itself. They spoke of poetry, debated philosophy, teased politicians, and performed with a freedom citizen women never tasted. For Hetairai, the symposium was both opportunity and danger. A clever remark could secure patronage. A careless word could end a career. Men like Socrates and Alcibiades are said to have shared space with such women, blurring the line between philosophy and flirtation. Some Hetairais became muses, remembered in poems long after their bodies were gone. Others were simply forgotten, their songs echoing only in the dim light of memory. Not every woman here was a Hetairai. Foreign prostitutes, slaves, and dancers also moved through these rooms. Some poured wine, others stripped to the rhythm of the drum, their eyes glassy from exhaustion or drink. The symposium could be a stage for brilliance, but it could also be a theater of humiliation. For every guest reclining comfortably, there was someone standing barefoot in service, invisible to the lofty words being spoken above them. The conversations themselves ranged wildly. One corner might buzz with laughter as men told bawdy jokes and riddles. Another corner might whisper about politics, alliances, and wars. And always, philosophy lingered. Questions about virtue, about love, about the soul. Plato's symposium would one day immortalize these discussions. But what the scrolls rarely admit is how deeply these debates were entwined with the presence of prostitutes. Desire was not just a theme, it was embodied, sitting, singing, and laughing in the room itself. Wine flowed, arguments sharpened, jokes grew louder. And as the hours stretched, restraint dissolved. Men leaned closer to Hetairais, whispering promises. Others stumbled, cups tipping, eyes closing in drunken stupor. The symposium was never a simple evening. It was an experiment in balance, a delicate weaving of intellect and indulgence. And so you sit among them, watching. You see how the Hetairais navigate the room with careful steps, how they shift tones from playful to serious, how they mirror a man's mood to flatter his pride. It is a performance, but it is also survival. A single night could change a life, an invitation to a patron's house, or a dismissal into obscurity. By dawn the room lies in ruins. Wine stains the floor, ashes from incense drift in the air, and a few figures snore heavily on couches. The Hetairais slip out quietly, their laughter fading into the cool morning streets. Another symposium has ended, leaving behind not only empty cups, but questions, connections, and forgotten songs. The Greeks spoke often of love, yet rarely agreed on what it truly meant. To them, eros could be divine fire, dangerous and consuming, or it could be a mere transaction, as common as bread. Between these two poles, sacred and profane, stood the figure of the prostitute, moving back and forth across the blurred line between pleasure and piety. You stand before the temple steps, where the columns rise like giants into the sky, incense burns in the air, and hymns float softly into the morning. Here, worshippers bring offerings, oil, honey cakes, garlands of flowers. Yet behind the rituals and prayers lies a question that has haunted historians for centuries. Were some of these temples home to sacred prostitution? The sources are scattered and contradictory. Greek writers such as Herodotus describe women in Babylon compelled to offer themselves to strangers in the temple of Ishtar. Later, poets whispered that Aphrodite's temples in Corinth echoed with similar practices, where women lay with men as an act of devotion to the goddess of love. But how much of this was truth, and how much was the exotic imagination of outsiders? The debate continues even now. Some scholars believe the notion of temple prostitution in Greece was more myth than fact, a slander used by rivals, or a romantic invention of poets eager to link sex with the sacred. Others argued that the presence of Aphrodite's cult, with its rituals of fertility, beauty, and sensuality, made it inevitable that sexuality would play a role in her worship. Whether symbolic or literal, the association was powerful. Imagine yourself in Corinth, where the great temple of Aphrodite once crowned the Acrocorinth hill. Ancient travelers claimed that over 1,000 women served there as priestesses, offering themselves to sailors and merchants in exchange for gifts to the goddess. The image is striking. A city where divine pleasure and earthly desire were indistinguishable, where devotion could be measured in both prayers and caresses. And yet, some historians now caution that these numbers may have been exaggerated, turned into legend by the astonished eyes of visitors. Still, the blending of sacred and sensual persisted in Greek imagination. Plays and poems often portrayed prostitutes as touched by Aphrodite herself, agents of her will, even if society scorned them. To lie with such a woman was, in a way, to brush against the divine. The Hetairai, with her wit and charm, could embody Aphrodite's gifts more vividly than any marble statue. And beyond the temples, even the rituals of everyday worship carried echoes of this entanglement. Weddings were consecrated with prayers to Aphrodite and Peitho, the goddess of persuasion. Fertility festivals featured dances and songs heavy with erotic symbolism. Offerings of doves and myrtle were made to ensure love's blessing. In these moments, desire was not hidden, it was sanctified. For the prostitutes of Greece, this blending of worlds was both a curse and a shield. On one hand, their profession carried stigma, marking them as outsiders in civic life. On the other, their association with the goddess gave them a strange sort of power. To scorn them too harshly was to risk offending Aphrodite herself, and in a city where divine favor was everything, that was a dangerous gamble. And so, in whispers, the question remained, when a man entered the bed of a Hetairai, was it lust alone, or was it also a kind of offering? When he touched her skin, was he indulging in sin, or was he brushing against something holy, something eternal? The night falls again, and torches flicker outside the temple walls. You listen to the hymns and watch the shadows of dancers moving in rhythm to the drums. In that glow, the line between sacred and profane dissolves, leaving only the pulse of desire, the same force that shaped cities, toppled kingdoms, and inspired the gods themselves. Coins clink in the hand, cool and heavy with promise. In Athens they carry the owl of Athena, goddess of wisdom, stamped into the silver. To some, these owls represent commerce, empire, the strength of the city. But for many women, they represent survival, bread, wine, shelter, the thin line between dignity and despair. You watch as a man presses a coin into a palm, his other hand already reaching for what it will purchase. For the prostitute, every gesture of desire is measured in drachmas. Yet not all prostitutes are priced the same, and the gradations tell a story of class, beauty, and power. At the lowest tier were the pornai, the streetwalkers and brothel women. Their services were quick, functional, and cheap, sometimes as little as an obol, the cost of a loaf of bread. Brothels, often owned by pimps or businessmen, operated openly, their profits taxed by the state. Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, was even said to have founded the first state-run brothels, claiming he did it to, quote, protect citizens from worse vices. Whether legend or truth, the story reveals how entwined sex work was with the machinery of the city. Above them were the Hetairai, the courtesans. Their price could not be fixed so easily, for they sold not just their bodies but their wit, their company, their cultural polish. A hetera might attend a symposium, sipping wine alongside philosophers, engaging in witty banter, quoting poetry, or debating politics. Her reward was not a single coin, but long-term gifts, protection, even estates. To be chosen by a wealthy patron could mean freedom from poverty, and sometimes a form of power denied to respectable wives. But even here, price was slippery. A hetairai could rise to fame, her reputation spreading like wildfire through the city. Men competed for her attention, showering her with jewels, robes of imported silk, or houses along the Piraeus. Yet, if her beauty faded, if her patron lost interest, the gilded world could collapse overnight. Beneath the elegance, her position was as precarious as that of the brothel girl. For the women themselves, the transaction was complicated. Every coin carried with it a mix of humiliation and survival. A single drachma could feed a child for days, but it was also a reminder of the price placed on a body, on a soul. To some, it was empowering. They could earn more than many artisans, even more than some laborers. To others, it was a constant reminder that their worth had been reduced to metals stamped by the state. The city profited as well. Taxes on prostitutes filled the public treasury. Athenian comedy often mocked this reality, men spending fortunes on Hetairai, bankrupting themselves for pleasure. Aristophanes, with his biting wit, joked that some men left more wealth to courtesans than to their own families. Yet beneath the laughter was unease. Money flowed not just through temples and markets, but through the bedrooms of women society pretended to despise. And here lies the irony. The same society that shamed prostitutes also relied upon them. Respectable women of Athens were hidden away, veiled, barred from public life. They could not dine with men, could not attend symposia, could not engage in debate. But the hetairai could. She became the outlet for male desire, conversation, companionship, and for this her price rose far beyond coin. Yet the fragility of it all was inescapable. A new beauty might arrive in the city and topple the old. A fickle patron could withdraw support with a word. Disease, scandal, or age could undo everything. You picture the hand that takes the coin, trembling slightly, though whether from hunger, fear, or calculation it is impossible to tell. The price of pleasure, after all, was never just silver. It was measured in reputation, in risk, in years of a woman's life spent balancing survival against shame. And as the markets close and the torches flicker, you realize, in Athens, desire was not free. It was counted, weighed, and stamped into every coin that changed hands. The sun has dipped behind the Acropolis, leaving the city washed in twilight. Torches flicker in narrow alleyways, smoke curling upward like restless spirits. The agora grows quiet, merchants rolling up their stalls, but elsewhere the night has just begun. You are led past a wooden door, its frame worn smooth by countless hands. It opens into a space that is at once intimate and public, secretive yet known to all. Behind closed doors, Athens reveals a side that daylight prefers to deny. Inside a brothel the air is thick, with oil lamps, with wine, with the tang of sweat. Reed mats line the floor, partitioned by thin curtains that do little to hide the shadows behind them. A man laughs too loudly, already drunk, coins clinking as he bargains for a girl. She does not smile, but she lowers her eyes and takes his hand. The porni here live lives of routine. The encounters are quick, transactional. Some women whisper prayers to Aphrodite before entering, hoping the goddess of love will grant them mercy. Others keep amulets tucked against their skin, charms against disease or violence. For them, the door is both a prison and a shield. Once it closes, the world reduces to a mat, a body, and the sound of coins on the table. Elsewhere, in the homes of the wealthy, doors open to more elaborate rituals. A Hetairai enters a symposium, greeted not with jeers but with admiration. Her hair is perfumed, her robe dyed deep, with imported pigments. She does not stand in the corner silently. She takes her place among men reclining on couches, her laughter mingling with theirs, as wine flows into kylixes. Behind these doors, intimacy is not only flesh, it is conversation, wit, allure. A Hetairai might lean close to whisper a clever phrase, or sing a line of Sappho's poetry, or challenge a philosopher with a question sharp enough to draw blood. The men around her, powerful in public, are eager here for the illusion of equality, of shared intellect. They drink, they argue, they touch. And she knows that every word, every glance, is part of the bargain. But behind the elegance lies vulnerability. A Hetairai depends on her ability to fascinate, to hold a man's attention longer than the wine in his cup. One wrong word, one rival, and she could find herself dismissed, the door closing behind her with finality. There were also private rooms, discreet and unmarked, where the lines blurred further. Lovers met in secrecy, affairs hidden from respectable wives. Behind closed doors, boundaries dissolved. A general might whisper to a courtesan what he could never say in the council chamber. A poet might entrust her with verses unfit for public recitation. Desire turned these spaces into confessionals, where bodies were offered, but secrets were often the true currency. And always, the door itself was symbolic. To pass through it was to cross a threshold, from the order of the polis to the private theater of desire, from the gaze of society into the silence of secrecy. For the women, each door held a different fate. Some opened to fleeting encounters that blurred together into nights of exhaustion. Some opened to rooms filled with music, debate, and laughter, where for a moment they could believe themselves equals. Others opened to danger, to men whose desire was violent, whose coin was cold comfort. You realize, as you imagine the countless footsteps that crossed these thresholds, that Athenian society itself depended on what happened here. Public order was sustained by private indulgence. Respectable wives were kept pure by doors that others walked through instead. And yet, outside, those same women were mocked, stigmatized, erased from memory. Behind closed doors, history unfolded in whispers. And once the lamps burned low, once the door shut for the last time, those whispers faded. Yet their echoes remain in every ruined wall, every fragment of pottery, every satirical line in a comic play. Morning returns to Athens with the sound of carts rattling over stone, vendors calling out figs and olives, and the clatter of sandals. Yet even as the city bustles, there is something unseen, something whispered, a shadow that follows the women you've just glimpsed behind closed doors. For though their bodies sustain the city, their presence is marked with shame. A man may spend the night in a brothel, laughing loudly, but in daylight he sneers at the very woman who warmed his bed. He walks past her in the marketplace without a glance. If he acknowledges her at all, it is with scorn. To admit fondness would be to taint his own reputation. In the rigid order of Athens, respectability had to be preserved at all costs. The prostitutes knew this well. A Hetairai could speak with brilliance in a symposium, sharing poems, sparking laughter, even swaying the opinion of men who shaped policy. Yet she would never be invited to a citizen's wife's home. She could never walk beside him in the daylight with his children at her side. Her intelligence, her wit, her beauty, all were confined to the shadows, desired, but never acknowledged openly. The pornai bore an even heavier weight. They were not courted with flattery, not admired for cleverness. They were dismissed as necessary evils, women who soaked up the hunger of men so that good women could remain untouched. And yet, society needed them. In a city where citizen wives were expected to remain chaste, secluded, and submissive, it was the prostitutes who bore the burdens of desire, ensuring that order was preserved within respectable households. It was hypocrisy of the sharpest kind. Aristophanes, in his comedies, mocked prostitutes mercilessly, reducing them to caricatures, greedy for coin and pleasure. Philosophers, too, wrote of them as temptresses and corrupters. Yet these same men were known to frequent brothels and keep Hetairai at their side. The shadow of stigma was not only cultural, it was personal, a double life that every man seemed to live. You imagine the pain of this contradiction. To be loved in secret, yet despised in public. To be touched with tenderness in the darkness, and spat at by the same lips in the light. The women carried it like a cloak they could never set down. And there was more. The law itself etched the stigma into permanence. No prostitute could ever marry a citizen. No child of hers could ever become a full citizen of Athens. Even if a Hetairai won a man's heart, even if he longed to make her his wife, the courts forbade it. The shadow of her profession extended not just to her own life, but to generations unborn. Scholars still debate, did Hetairai wield true power in these relationships, or was their agency an illusion? Some argue they held influence, shaping opinions and softening hearts in a society of hard lines. Others believe that power was fleeting, always fragile, always dependent on the whims of men who could discard them with a word. Yet perhaps the truth lies in between. They lived in the liminal space, needed but not respected, adored but not cherished, powerful yet powerless. The shadow of stigma stretched long across their lives, and yet, without them, Athens itself might not have stood so tall, for the respectable order of the polis rested on this silent contradiction. Behind every citizen wife cloistered in her home, there was a prostitute who bore the weight of a man's passion. Behind every polished speech in the assembly, there was a night spent in whispered conversation with a Hetairai. The city's greatness was built not only on marble temples and philosophy, but also on shadows, on women who walked streets they could never claim, who bore lives they could never own. And in this, Athens reveals its deepest paradox, the birthplace of democracy, the cradle of philosophy, a city that exalted beauty and wisdom, yet denied humanity to those who embodied both. The sun dips low over Athens, shadows stretching long across the Acropolis. Torches are lit in the courtyards, and music begins to spill from hidden rooms. Somewhere, a lyre plays softly. Somewhere, laughter swells, and the crack of dice on stone echoes down narrow lanes. You follow a Hetairai into one of these gatherings. Her perfume drifts around her like a veil, her voice lilting as she greets men already flushed from wine. She is paid to entertain, to charm, to make every man feel like he is the center of her gaze. Yet what you see in her smile, what any observer might wonder, is where performance ends and feeling begins. Love and transaction lived entangled here, a knot impossible to separate. Some Hetairai became more than companions. They slipped past the role of courtesan and became confidants, lovers, even the muses of poets and philosophers. Think of Aspasia, whose words influenced Pericles himself, shaping the policies of Athens during its golden age. Was theirs a transaction that grew into love? Or love dressed as transaction, justified by the exchange of gifts and status? Scholars still argue, as if their intimacy could ever be pinned down like a butterfly. The Pornai, too, were caught in this same tension, though more brutally. A man would pay his obol, enter a dim room, and lie with a woman whose body carried the weight of survival. Yet not every encounter was only lust and coin. There are records, rare, but there, of men who returned again and again to the same woman, who paid not for novelty but for familiarity, for a smile that recognized them, for the illusion that something tender lingered beneath the bargain. Imagine that moment, a man whispering words of affection in the darkness, promising he will come back, that she is different from the rest. For her, the words are currency too, words to ensure he returns, to keep the coin flowing. And yet, who can say she never felt a flicker of warmth when his hand lingered too long, when his laughter softened her fatigue? Humans are not ledgers. Affection slips in, uninvited, like wine spilling over the rim of a cup. But affection was dangerous. For a Hetairai, to fall in love was to risk losing her carefully balanced freedom. If she gave her heart too easily, she became vulnerable, dependent on one man's favor. If she withheld it entirely, she risked losing her appeal, for the men wanted illusion as much as touch. So she lived in between, half mask, half heart, a constant performance where even she might not know where the line lay. Some ancient writers described Hetairai as schemers, wielding affection like a weapon. Others described them as tragic, caught between desire and duty. Both are true, perhaps. To survive in Athens as a woman outside the bonds of marriage required cunning, but cunning does not erase longing. You can almost hear the whisper of one such woman in the dark, "I sell what I must, but my heart is still my own." Yet she knows that even the heart may be bartered, slowly, piece by piece, until she is unsure what was ever freely hers. And this was the paradox of love in the brothels and symposium halls of Athens. Every touch was a transaction, every word a performance, and yet, in the midst of it, something real could spark, fragile and fleeting, a stolen glance, a shared laugh, a memory that outlasted the coin. It is this ambiguity that unsettles historians even today. Were these women calculating merchants of affection, or were they as vulnerable to love as any of us? The truth, like love itself, refuses to be contained. It is slippery, defiant, both transaction and tenderness, forever intertwined. Night has fully claimed Athens. Oil lamps flicker before doorways, and smoke rises in thin curls toward the stars. In the distance, high on the Acropolis, the great temple of Athena glows in the moonlight, its marble columns catching silver hues. The city sleeps and stirs beneath the eternal gaze of its gods. For prostitutes, pornai and hetairai alike, this gaze was never absent. Every embrace, every whispered word, every coin that passed from palm to palm existed within a spiritual framework older than memory. To the Greeks, sex was never merely physical. It was tangled with divinity, with fertility, with questions of purity and pollution. Take Aphrodite, goddess of love and desire. Her shrines were filled with votive offerings, small figurines, polished mirrors, even inscriptions carved by men and women seeking favor in matters of passion. Some scholars argue that certain prostitutes, especially those working near sanctuaries, were seen as under her patronage. Their beauty, their allure, their power to stir longing was not only human but divine. To lie with them was, in some way, to brush against the goddess herself. Yet there was a darker side. Where Aphrodite brought charm and desire, Artemis demanded chastity, and Athena, the virgin goddess, embodied wisdom unsullied by flesh. These figures cast judgment too. A woman selling her body was not only a social outsider but, in some interpretations, spiritually polluted. The contradiction lay at the heart of Greek religion. Sex was sacred and profane, creative and corrupting. In Corinth, ancient writers described a striking image. Hundreds of prostitutes dedicated to Aphrodite's temple, their bodies considered vessels of the goddess's power. Whether this was exaggeration or truth, the story reveals how strongly Greeks linked sex work to the divine. To modern ears, it may sound shocking, the idea of worship intertwined with prostitution, but to the ancients it was not contradiction, but mystery. Imagine yourself standing at a shrine at night. A woman approaches, dressed in bright fabric, bracelets chiming softly. She places a coin at the goddess's feet, whispers a prayer, and then returns to her work. For her, every act might be tinged with ritual, every lover another offering. But the gods were not gentle witnesses. Ancient texts warned that too much indulgence invited hubris, the arrogance that angered the divine. A man who spent all his fortune in brothels was mocked as a fool, but also pitied as cursed, ensnared by desire beyond reason. A woman who took too much pride in her beauty, too much profit from her body, risked nemesis, divine retribution. Still, religion offered a strange kind of shield. The Hetairai who hosted symposiums could invoke the muses, aligning their wit and artistry with divine inspiration. Even the pornai, when maligned, could point to Aphrodite's power, reminding men that what they purchased was not just flesh, but a spark of the goddess's flame. In this way, every encounter became double-layered, one part coin and contract, another part ritual, framed beneath the eyes of immortals. For Athenians, the bed was never just a bed. It was an altar, sometimes sacred, sometimes profane, often both at once. And so the prostitutes of Athens lived not only in the gaze of men but also under the endless gaze of gods. They were judged, blessed, condemned, and exalted all at once. Their work was earthly, their bodies tangible, but their role lingered on the edge of the divine, where human desire met immortal scrutiny. The lamps have burned low. The streets of Athens are quiet now, broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or the rattle of a cartwheel rolling toward dawn. In the stillness, the stories of the women who moved through these alleys, Hetairai, pornai, flute girls, dancers, hang in the air like incense, almost gone, almost forgotten. History, after all, was not written by them. It was written by men, philosophers, generals, playwrights, and statesmen. They left behind speeches and laws, satire and gossip. They carved judgment into tablets and etched ridicule into plays performed for thousands. Yet the women themselves, their laughter, their fears, their private thoughts, rarely made it to parchment. Silence was their legacy. And yet, fragments survive. In court records, we glimpse their names, dragged into disputes about inheritance or slander. In comedies, we hear echoes of their voices, though twisted into caricature. In poetry, we feel flickers of tenderness, verses that compare Hetairai to muses, or lament their absence as though mourning a lost wife. In these scattered shards, their lives glint briefly before fading again. Think of Aspasia. She was mocked, reviled, accused of corrupting Athens with her influence. Yet centuries later, she is remembered not as a nameless brothel girl, but as a woman who shaped Pericles' speeches, who conversed with Socrates, who stood toe-to-toe with the greatest minds of her age. Through her, we see how thin the line was between ridicule and respect, between dismissal and immortality. But for most, immortality was not given. Their stories dissolved like footprints in dust, swept away by time. Still, they left traces in the culture that endures, in laws that tried to regulate them, in temples where they left offerings, in plays and poems that reveal society's unease with them. Their silence is not empty. It is heavy, carrying all the weight of what was lived but never recorded. Today, when we speak of ancient Athens, we often recall its democracy, its philosophers, its marble temples gleaming in the sun. Rarely do we speak of the women who walked its nights, who kept its secrets, who bore its contradictions in their bodies. Yet they too were Athens. Without them, the story is incomplete. And so, as the stars fade, and the first light of morning brushes the Acropolis, you feel the presence of all those forgotten women still lingering in the city's stones. They are shadows, whispers, half-heard laughter on the breeze. They are reminders that history is not only the story of the great, but also of the unseen, the ones whose names were buried but whose lives mattered deeply. Their legacy is silence, but if you listen closely enough, even silence can speak. You have walked the streets of Athens at dawn, followed the footsteps of Hetairai and flute girls through the crowded agora, lingered in painted symposium halls, and slipped into the silence of their night. You have seen the contradiction of their world, desired yet despised, celebrated yet erased, remembered only in fragments. But now, as the story softens, you return to the present. Imagine yourself reclining in your own quiet space, the weight of centuries slowly lifting from your shoulders. The noise of the agora fades, the laughter of the symposium dissolves, and the flicker of the oil lamp dims until it is gone. You are left only with stillness, a stillness that stretches across time, reminding you that lives come and go, that history is made of both voices and silences. The women of Athens are gone, but for this brief moment, they were remembered, and so they live again. Let your breath slow, let your thoughts drift, like incense smoke rising into the night air. Feel your body soften into rest, as though you too have set aside your work, your worries, your masks, and stepped into silence. Tomorrow will come, just as it came for them. But tonight, There is nothing you must do but surrender to the quiet. Sleep well.